What is the origin of each F1 team? Each team on the grid is always subject to ownership changes and sometimes name changes too. Some, like McLaren, Ferrari and Williams, are extremely consistent, and others, like Alpine, not so much. So, here is the backstory of every F1 team on the grid. Red Bull Racing. Red Bull Racing can trace their roots back to 1996, when three-time Formula 1 world champion Jackie Stewart agreed a deal with Ford to be their works team. At the time, Red Bull were a title sponsor of rival Sauber on a 10-year agreement. Stewart Grand Prix did not find much success, with only one win and a handful of podiums before Ford took controlling interest in the team and rebranded as Jaguar for 2000. Again, with not much success, Ford sold the Jaguar racing team to Red Bull in late 2004, and from 2005, Red Bull Racing was officially a Formula 1 constructor. Since then, they have won 5 World Constructors' Championships and 6 World Drivers' Championships with Sebastian Vettel and Max Verstappen. They have 94 race victories, 238 podiums, 83 pole positions, and 85 fastest laps. Red Bull are 6th on the all-time most successful constructors list, until Max adds to them next race. Scuderia Ferrari. Scuderia Ferrari was founded in 1929 to race Alfa Romeos. In 1933, Alfa withdrew their in-house team from racing, meaning Ferrari was now the race team. In 1939, following the acquisition of shares in Scuderia Ferrari, Alfa decided to bring their race team in-house, removing Enzo Ferrari from the equation in the process. Enzo then started another Ferrari team, but this time he built his own cars. He took part in multiple forms of racing, including Grand Prix racing, and although missing the first ever race of the newly branded Formula 1 World Championship in 1950 due to disagreement over race fees, Ferrari is the only constructor to compete in every Formula 1 season. Since then, they have won 16 World Constructor Championships and 15 World Drivers' Championships with Michael Schumacher, Niki Lauda, Kimi Raikkonen, Juan Manuel Fangio, Mike Hawthorn, and many more legendary drivers. They have 241 race victories, 793 podiums, 242 pole positions, and 258 fastest laps. Ferrari are the all-time most successful constructor in Formula 1 history. Amazing that the most successful team has the worst strategies in the pit lane. I mean, honestly, what are they even? Mercedes-AMG. Mercedes competed in Grand Prix racing in the 1930s, before it was known as Formula 1, and joined again in 1954, when it was known as Formula 1. They won the 1954 Drivers' Championship with Juan Manuel Fangio, and again in 1955 with Fangio once again. Mercedes then withdrew from all motorsport at the end of the 1955 season, following an accident involving a Mercedes at that year's 24 Hours of Le Mans race, which killed over 80 people. Now to the confusing part. Tyrrell Racing began in 1958 and entered Formula 1 in 1968. They achieved some success with 1 Constructors' Championship in 1971 and 3 Drivers' Championships with Jackie Stewart. Following years of decline, the outfit was then sold to British American Racing, or BAR, in 1997, but they competed as Tyrrell for 1 more season and then BAR from 1999. They had some success with 15 podiums and star drivers like Jacques Villeneuve and Jenson Button. Despite Button having an unbelievable 2004 season, the results declined in 2005 and Honda acquired 100% ownership of the team at the end of the year. Honda had a decent couple of years with 3 race wins and 9 podiums, but in the centre of the 2008 financial crisis, Honda pulled out of the sport. That brings us along to one of the most unbelievable stories in Formula 1 history. In early 2009, a consortium led by Ross Brawn, one of the masterminds behind the Ferrari Schumacher dominance era, instigated a buyout of Honda, and with Mercedes engines, they entered the 2009 season as Brawn GP. And they absolutely dominated the competition out of nowhere. A number of factors, none of which I am smart enough to explain, meant the car was simply unstoppable in the opening half of the season. While other teams developed their car, the budget dwindled for Brawn GP, but they had done enough to win both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships in 2009. At the end of the year, Mercedes bought the rights to the team and began competing in the 2010 season. Since then, they have been a monster of Formula 1, winning 8 Constructors' Championships and 7 Drivers' Championships with Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg. They have 125 race victories, 281 podiums, 136 pole positions, and 100 fastest laps. Mercedes are joint third on all-time most successful constructors list. So it seems that Mercedes join Formula 1, win everything, and then leave, so we're in uncharted territory with them not winning at the moment. Alpine. Alpine can trace its roots back to Toleman. Yes, the same Toleman that Senna raced Prost with in the 1984 Monaco Grand Prix. Toleman entered F1 in 1981, and with a handful of mediocre seasons, the clothing brand Benetton purchased the team at the end of 1985 and raced under their own name for 1986. Benetton had a successful Formula 1 campaign with 1 Constructors' Championship and 2 Drivers' Championships from Michael Schumacher. They won 27 races, had 102 podiums and 36 fastest laps. After losing Schumacher to Ferrari, they never realised that same success again, and the team was rebranded Renault F1 Team from 2002. They had a few down seasons before securing Fernando Alonso when he won 2 Constructors' Championships and 2 Drivers' Championships in 2005 and 2006. At the end of 2010, Lotus agreed to buy 25% stake in the team as Renault dialed back, and the team was rebranded as Lotus Renault Grand Prix for the 2011 season, and then Lotus F1 Team from 2012. They achieved some success with 2 victories, 25 podiums, and 5 fastest laps due to the Iceman and Fireboy. After Raikkonen replaced the outgoing Felipe Massa at Ferrari for 2014, Lotus never achieved those results again, and switched back to Renault for 2016. Renault competed until 2020 and rebranded as Alpine. Since then, they have achieved 1 race victory with Esteban Ocon, 2 podiums, and some contract saga with Piastri. So yeah, that's Alpine. McLaren. Bruce McLaren began racing at 14 years old and slowly climbed the ranks of New Zealand motorsport, eventually competing in the New Zealand Formula 2 Championship. After being talent spotted in 1958, he raced for the Cooper team in F2 and was quickly promoted to F1 for 1959. He won the United States Grand Prix of that year, becoming the youngest driver to win an F1 race, a record that stood for over 40 years. In 1963, he founded Bruce McLaren Motor Racing and began building race cars, initially so that he could compete in the Australasian Tasman Series and the Can-Am Series. Bruce raced for the Cooper F1 team until the end of the 1965 season and then entered his own team for 1966. In those early days, they had a handful of wins, but all that changed when Bruce McLaren was killed at the wheel of a McLaren M8D, designed for the Can-Am series. Following McLaren's death, Teddy Mayer, who was a shareholder in McLaren's company, assumed control of the business and led McLaren to their first Constructors' Championships in the 1970s. I could spend all day talking about the team's development, particularly in the mid-70s, with the famous Hunt-Lauda rivalry, but maybe that's for another time. In 1980, the team had been declining for the last few seasons and decided to merge with Ron Dennis's Project 4 Formula 2 team. In the merger, Dennis brought legendary designer John Barnard, who introduced the carbon fibre chassis and semi-automatic gearbox to F1 in the 80s. The McLaren team then went from strength to strength under Ron Dennis's leadership, with star drivers including Niki Lauda, Alain Prost, Ayrton Senna, Mika Hakkinen, this square-faced dude, Kimi Raikkonen, Fernando Alonso, and Lewis Hamilton. They haven't seen that same success since their quick but notoriously unreliable 2012 car, which is when Hamilton left the team for Mercedes. They then went into a shockingly bad Honda era, breaking the record for grid penalties at every race. Then they had Renault engines, and then back to Mercedes for 2021. They did have that one shock 1-2 at the 2021 Italian Grand Prix after Verstappen decided Lewis made a good parking space, but that was unfortunately their last win. Since they began, McLaren have won 8 World Constructors' Championships and 12 World Driver Championships. They have 183 race victories, 494 podiums, 156 pole positions, and 161 fastest laps. They are the second oldest surviving Formula 1 team on the grid, behind Ferrari, having competed since 1966. So they should use that experience to give Lando a winning car because he deserves one. Alfa Romeo. Alfa Romeo began Grand Prix racing in the 1920s and found continuous success until the mid-1930s. After withdrawing their works team, Alfa Romeo cars were run most notably by Enzo Ferrari's Scuderia Ferrari team until the late 1930s. All motorsport then halted for the Second World War. After the war had ended, Alfa came out of the blocks firing on all cylinders and won every Grand Prix they entered, barring 3 from 1946 to 1949. When the Formula 1 World Championship was formed in 1950, they dominated that too with Nino Farina, and then again in 1951 with Juan Manuel Fangio. After these wins, Alfa Romeo withdrew from Formula 1 due to the high cost of operating the Grand Prix team. Separately, Sauber Motorsport was formed in 1970 and climbed the ranks until joining the Formula 1 grid in 1993. The team actually had a quick car, but that was only when they actually made the race distance. Since solving those problems, they have always been a solid midfield constructor throughout various iterations, including a stint as the BMW factory team, which saw Robert Kubica achieve the team's only race win at the 2008 Canadian Grand Prix, just 12 months after deciding he would end the previous Canadian Grand Prix in the wall. They hosted high-profile drivers such as Heinz-Harald Frentzen, Kimi Raikkonen, Felipe Massa, Sebastian Vettel and Sergio Perez. Sauber had 1 race victory, 27 podiums, 1 pole position and 5 fastest laps. After a slew of disappointing seasons, the team was renamed Alfa Romeo Sauber F1 for the 2018 season and then again from 2019 as just Alfa Romeo F1 Team. The team's ownership, race license and whole factory setup still technically lies with Sauber Motorsport. As Alfa Romeo, they have not achieved much. Alongside their championship wins in the 50s, they did compete between 1979 and 1985 without any real success, but as their current incarnation, they've had star drivers such as Kimi Raikkonen, Charles Leclerc, Valtteri Bottas and of course Italian Jesus, but no wins, podiums or pole positions. Guan Yu Zhou does have 2 fastest laps though, so that's something. Aston Martin. Aston Martin first entered Formula 1 in 1959 and exited mid-1960. This unsuccessful stint was due to poor reliability, poor performance, and without even a single point, they abandoned F1 after the 1960 British Grand Prix. They did consider entering a team in 2008 and 2010 before sponsoring Red Bull from 2016 to 2020. The current incarnation of Aston can trace their roots back to an Irish lad with a dream. Eddie Jordan formed Eddie Jordan Racing in the early 80s and fielded drivers such as Martin Brundle, Jean Lacey, Eddie Irvine and Johnny Herbert. With some success in lower formulas, Eddie entered Formula 1 in 1991. He even had Michael Schumacher compete in his first F1 race racing for Jordan at the 1991 Belgian Grand Prix. Jordan was a solid midfield constructor for a while and dropped off in the early 2000s. They saw checkered results with 4 wins, 19 podiums and a Best Constructors' Championship finish of 3rd in 1999. Eddie Jordan sold the team to the Midland Group in 2005 and the team was renamed Midland F1 for the 2006 season. That season was not the best. Even before the end of the 2006 season, Midland F1 was sold to Spiker Cars and was renamed the Spiker F1 Team for 2007. They scored a single point that season at the Japanese Grand Prix, and then it was sold to a consortium led by Vijay Mallya and renamed Force India for 2008. Like Jordan, Force India was a solid midfield runner with a handful of podiums, but amid financial problems for Vijay, another consortium led by Lawrence Stroll ended up acquiring the assets after the team was put into administration during the 2018 Hungarian Grand Prix. The team was renamed Racing Point Force India for the remainder of the season and then just Racing Point from 2019. In 2020, Racing Point, they basically turned up with the 2019 championship winning Mercedes, so they were fast. fast enough to Perez win that bizarre race in Bahrain. Regardless of the controversial car, they did well, and after Lawrence Stroll bought 15% stake in Aston Martin, the team was rebranded as Aston Martin for 2021. Since then, they've achieved 3 podiums, destroyed the career prospects of Sebastian Vettel, and somehow convinced Fernando Alonso to make a good career move. Haas F1. Gene Haas used to be a successful businessman and formed a NASCAR team in 2002. I think they've been fairly successful, but I don't know all that much about NASCAR, I'll be honest. Following the collapse of the Marussia F1 team, Gene purchased the Banbury headquarters to serve as a European base for his own F1 team. With some serious help from Ferrari and unrestricted testing in 2015, they came out the blocks firing on all cylinders for the 2016 season, and then it's dwindled a little bit since then. Since entering F1, they have no wins, no podiums, 236 points, 1 pole position for Kevin Magnussen, and 2 fastest laps. It of course didn't help with Nikita Mazepin spinning every chance he got, or Romain Grosjean giving the fire department a job to do, but at least they've got these 2 this year. Alpha Tauri. The Red Bull sister team can trace its roots back to Minardi F1. Having started in the lower formulas in the early 1980s before moving to Formula 1 in 1985, they never achieved a win, pole position, or any podiums, so how the hell they were still going in 2000 is astonishing. However, they had consistent money trouble and eventually sold the team to Australian businessman Paul Stoddart, who merged the F1 team with his European Racing Formula 3000 team. With a little more success, Paul fielded drivers such as Mark Webber and Fernando Alonso, but wound up selling the team to Red Bull in 2005. From 2006, the team was renamed Scuderia Toro Rosso and worked to promote Red Bull junior drivers into F1 prior to moving into the main team. This worked promoting drivers like Alex Albon, Jean-Eric Vergne, Daniel Ricciardo, Carlos Sainz Jr., Pierre Gasly,
Alla fine c'era il ancora.
Daniel Kvyat, and of course Sebastian Vettel and Max Verstappen. Toro Rosso were always a solid midfielder and even had that one crazy win for Vettel at the 2008 Italian Grand Prix. In December 2019, Red Bull announced the team would be called Scuderia AlphaTauri to promote Red Bull's fashion brand, and they have raced under the AlphaTauri name ever since. In that time, they have achieved 1 victory, 2 podiums, 1 fastest lap, and introduced the world to a clothing brand that nobody's ever heard of. At least they gave Nick de Vries a full-time race seat though. Williams. Williams Racing is a bit of a weird one to explain the initial stages of, since there's technically been 2 different Williams F1 teams. Founded by Frank Williams in the late 1960s, Frank Williams Racing Cars joined Formula 1 for the 1969 racing season. The team did not achieve much in their early years, and due to financial difficulties, 60% of the team was sold to Canadian millionaire Walter Wolf to become Wolf Williams Racing for the 1976 F1 season. It was not a great year, and Frank Williams left the team after being removed from the manager role by Walter Wolf. That team became Walter Wolf Racing in 1977. Undeterred, Frank then set up Williams Grand Prix Engineering for the 1977 season, with his trusted lead engineer Patrick Head. Again, they had a slow start being a new team, but they eventually found their groove, winning their first championship in 1980. They were successful in the 1980s, winning a handful of championships throughout the decade, until McLaren decided they would build a spaceship in the form of an F1 car, employing arguably the 2 best drivers on the grid in the process. In 1992, Williams decided to do the same thing. They added traction control, active suspension, and other electronic wizardry. They ran away with the 92 title, and again with the 93 title. Unfortunately, 1994 was a difficult year for the team, losing Ayrton Senna in race 4 and Damon Hill losing the championship in Adelaide after Schumacher. Well, you can make your own mind up about that finale. After championship wins in 1996 and 1997, the team settled into the competitive midfield for the foreseeable future. Williams was sold to the American investing group Dorilton Capital in mid-2020 due to ongoing financial difficulties. they have managed to return to the midfield on a more consistent basis, with Alex Albon simply driving the wheels off that car while Latifi did Latifi things. Since they began, Williams have won 9 World Constructors' Championships and 7 World Drivers' Championships. They have 114 race victories, 313 podiums, 128 pole positions, and 133 fastest laps. Williams are the second most successful F1 constructor of all time behind Ferrari. So there you go, that's all F1 teams on the grid and where they've all come from. Hope you enjoyed this video, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you next time.